Dramatic music begins, sound of roaring race cars in the background. Imagine this. You're speeding around the track at over 200 miles per hour. Your heart is pounding, your focus razor sharp. And then, right there in the middle of the race, you glance down, not at your fuel gauge, but at your blood sugar monitor. Pause. This is the life of Charlie Kimball, an IndyCar driver who didn't let type 1 diabetes stop him from chasing his dream. His story is not just about racing cars, it's about racing past fear, doubt, and limits. Inspiring music slowly builds. Soft cinematic piano, visuals of a young boy watching race cars zoom by. Ever since he was a little boy, Charlie Kimball dreamed of being behind the wheel. He grew up in California, surrounded by the sound of engines and the smell of burning rubber. By his early 20s, that dream had become real. He was racing in Europe, chasing the path to Formula One. Pause. But just when everything seemed perfect, life threw him a curveball. Music shifts, slow, emotional tone, hospital ambience. It started with small things, feeling tired, thirsty all the time, losing weight fast. A visit to the doctor brought news that changed everything. Charlie was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. Pause. The doctor's words hit hard. You might never race again. Pause. Soft piano continues. Imagine hearing that your life's dream could end overnight. For most, that would be the finish line. But for Charlie, it became the starting line of something even greater. Inspiring music begins to rise. Charlie refused to give up. Instead, he learned everything he could about managing diabetes. He worked with his doctors, trained harder than ever, and adapted his car to fit his needs. Camera pans to racing cockpit with glucose monitor and insulin pump. He wore an insulin pump under his suit. He checked his blood sugar before every race. And during every lap, his car's dashboard displayed his glucose level, right next to his speed and fuel. Pause, determined tone. He wasn't just racing competitors anymore. He was racing diabetes itself. Music builds to a powerful, cinematic crescendo. In 2011, Charlie Kimball made history, becoming the first full-time IndyCar driver with type 1 diabetes. 2 years later, he crossed the finish line first to the Mid-Ohio IndyCar race, proving to the world that diabetes doesn't have to hold you back. Visual, slow-motion shot of Charlie raising his arms in victory. His victory wasn't just on the racetrack. It was in the hearts of millions living with diabetes, who finally saw proof that their dreams were still possible. Gentle but uplifting piano returns. Charlie Kimball once said, "Diabetes didn't slow me down. It just taught me to be smarter, stronger, and more aware." His story is a reminder that no diagnosis defines who you are. Your limits are only as strong as your belief in yourself. Pause. Inspiring music rises. So if you're living with diabetes, remember this. You can still drive your dreams. You can still cross the finish line. And like Charlie Kimball, you can still win the race of life. Music swells and fades with the sound of an Indy car speeding off into the distance. Dramatic music starts softly, sound of racing cars fades in. Imagine flying down a racetrack at 200 miles per hour. The crowd roars, engines scream, and your pulse races, not just from adrenaline, but from diabetes. Pause. This is the story of Charlie Kimball, the IndyCar driver who refused to let type 1 diabetes take the wheel of his life. Inspiring music builds. He didn't just race cars. He raced against the limits life tried to put on him. Soft background music. Visuals of young Charlie at the racetrack with his dad. Charlie Kimball was born with gasoline in his veins. From the time he was a kid, he dreamed of standing on the winner's podium, covered in champagne and victory. By his early 20s, he was living that dream, racing in Europe, climbing the ranks of professional motorsport. Camera pans across racing tracks and smiling crowds. But one day, everything changed. Music turns quiet. Hospital sounds, faint heart monitor beeps. In 2007, just weeks before a major race, Charlie started feeling strange, thirsty all the time, tired, losing weight. A doctor's visit changed everything. He was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. Pause. He was told that his racing career might be over. Imagine hearing that the one thing you've worked for your entire life could be gone. Soft piano music begins. Charlie could have quit. Many expected him to. But instead, he decided to fight back. Music shifts, determined, building energy. With his doctor's help, Charlie learned how to manage his diabetes on and off the track. He wore an insulin pump inside his racing suit. A glucose monitor sat on his steering wheel, showing real-time blood sugar levels even while driving at full speed. Visuals, dashboard with glucose reading, intense race footage. Every race became a test of precision, not just in driving, but in balance, discipline, and control. And Charlie mastered it all. In 2011, he made history as the first licensed driver with type 1 diabetes to race full-time in the IndyCar series. Inspiring music rises. And just 2 years later, in 2013, he won his first IndyCar race. Charlie Kimball didn't just prove something to the world. He proved something to himself. That diabetes doesn't define you. It challenges you. It teaches you to be aware, to be strong, to be unstoppable. Cut to Charlie celebrating, waving to fans, smiling in pit lane. He once said, "Diabetes didn't slow me down. It just gave me a reason to be smarter." Inspiring music swells. Visuals of sunlight hitting the racetrack. So, to everyone living with diabetes, remember this. Your life is not over. It's just getting started on a new track. Pause. Because like Charlie Kimball, you can still race your dreams, no matter what stands in your way. Music fades out with sound of racing car speeding by. Dramatic music fades in. Sound of roaring engines, cheering crowd. Imagine racing at 200 miles per hour. Every second matters. One wrong move, and it's over. But now imagine doing it while your body fights a silent battle. A battle with type 1 diabetes. Pause. This is the story of Charlie Kimball, a man who refused to slow down when life tried to stop him. A man who proved that even when the odds are stacked against you, you can still win your race. Inspiring music rises. Soft piano begins. Visuals of a young boy watching race cars. Charlie Kimball grew up dreaming of speed. As a kid, he'd watch race cars blur past and imagine his name on the side of one. By his 20s, that dream had come true. He was racing in Europe, chasing a spot in Formula One. Pause. But one day, his engine of life started to sputter. Music shifts, quiet, emotional tone. Charlie began feeling strange. Always thirsty, losing weight, his energy fading fast. Doctors ran tests, and the result hit him like a crash at full speed. He had type 1 diabetes. Pause. The first thing they told him was, "You might never race again." Soft piano continues. For someone whose life revolved around the track, those words felt like the end of the road. But Charlie wasn't built to give up. He took a deep breath and said, "I'll find a way." Music builds, hopeful, determined tone. Instead of quitting, Charlie learned to race with diabetes. He worked closely with his doctors, learned to monitor his blood sugar, and even designed a system to manage his glucose levels while driving. Sound of engine revving. Visuals of cockpit with monitor displaying numbers. He wore an insulin pump under his suit. He kept a glucose meter on his steering wheel, and his pit crew monitored his numbers just like his lap times. Every race became more than competition. It became a battle of balance, discipline, and heart. Inspiring music builds. Music swells, triumphant tone. In 2011, Charlie Kimball made history, becoming the first full-time IndyCar driver with type 1 diabetes. And just 2 years later, he crossed the finish line at the Mid-Ohio IndyCar race. A winner not just on the track, but in life. Sound of crowd cheering, slow-motion shot of victory celebration. He proved that diabetes wasn't the end of his story. It was just the start of a new chapter. Soft, inspiring piano returns. Charlie Kimball once said, "Diabetes didn't slow me down. It just made me smarter and stronger." His story reminds us all that no diagnosis defines you, that your limits are only as real as you believe they are. Pause. Inspiring music rises softly. Asterisk. So if you're living with diabetes, remember, the journey doesn't end here. It's just another track. And like Charlie, you can still cross the finish line stronger than ever. Music swells, sound of a car, engine roaring into the distance. Dramatic music plays, sound of engines roaring in the background. At over 200 miles an hour, there's no room for hesitation. One wrong move, 1 second of doubt, and everything can change. But what if the biggest challenge isn't on the racetrack? It's inside your own body. Pause. Music softens. This is the story of Charlie Kimball, a man who refused to let type 1 diabetes take the driver's seat. A story of speed, struggle, and the strength to never give up. Inspiring music begins to rise. Soft piano music. Visuals of a young boy watching cars speed by. Since childhood, Charlie Kimball was fascinated by speed. Every roar of an engine, every flash of a race car, it all pulled him closer to one dream, to become a professional racer. By his early 20s, he was living that dream, racing in Europe, climbing the ranks toward Formula One. Pause. But life had its own curve waiting on the next lap. Music turned somber, faint sounds of hospital beeps. It started with small signs, constant thirst, weight loss, and fatigue. When he went to the doctor, the results came back with words that changed everything. Type 1 diabetes. Pause. For a racer, that meant uncertainty, needles, insulin, blood sugar levels, and constant monitoring. His dream was suddenly on hold. Doctors warned him, maybe it's time to stop racing. Soft piano plays gently. But Charlie wasn't ready to give up the driver's seat of his own life. Inspiring music begins, sounds of tools, engines, and determination. Instead of quitting, Charlie made a new plan. He learned how to manage his diabetes. Every meal, every race, every heartbeat. He began using an insulin pump under his race suit. A glucose monitor on his steering wheel showed his levels during every race. His pit crew wasn't just watching lap times, they were watching his health. Dramatic pause. Every time he climbed into the car, he wasn't just racing competitors. He was racing against his own limits. Music swells, triumphant tone, crowd cheering sounds fade in. In 2011, Charlie Kimball made history as the first full-time IndyCar driver with type 1 diabetes. And just 2 years later, in 2013, he crossed the finish line first to the Mid-Ohio IndyCar race. Pause. Emotional piano note. It wasn't just a win on the track. It was proof that no condition, no diagnosis could define what he could achieve. Inspiring music builds to its peak. Soft and emotional background music. Charlie Kimball once said, "Diabetes didn't slow me down, it just gave me another reason to go faster." His story reminds us that life's challenges aren't roadblocks, they're just pit stops on the way to something greater. Pause, asterisk. So, to everyone living with diabetes, don't give up your race. Adjust your strategy, find your rhythm, and keep driving forward. Music swells, sound of a car speeding past. Because like Charlie Kimball, you can still finish strong. Fade out, inspiring music fades gently. Sound of roaring race cars, dramatic cinematic music fades in. The crowd is roaring. Engines scream at full power. Every second counts as the car races past 200 miles per hour. But deep inside that helmet is a man fighting another race, one inside his own body. Pause. This is the story of Charlie Kimball, the IndyCar driver who refused to slow down, even after being diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. Inspiring music rises softly. Soft piano music, visuals of a young Charlie playing with toy cars and watching races with his father. Ever since he was a little boy, Charlie Kimball dreamed of speed. His father worked in racing, and young Charlie wanted nothing more than to follow in his footsteps. By his early 20s, that dream was real. He was racing in Europe, climbing the ladder toward Formula One. Life seemed perfect, until one day, everything changed. Music fades, faint hospital sounds, slow, emotional piano. It started with small signs, constant thirst, weight loss, and exhaustion. Charlie didn't know what was wrong, until doctors told him the news that turned his world upside down. He had type 1 diabetes. Pause. The doctors warned him. Driving a race car might no longer be possible. Soft music swells. In a single moment, Charlie's dream, the one he'd worked for his entire life, felt like it had been taken away. Pause. But instead of giving up, Charlie decided to fight back. Music shifts to hopeful, steady, determined rhythm. Charlie refused to let diabetes stop him. He learned how to manage his condition, checking his blood sugar, balancing meals, and tracking his insulin. Sound of engine revving softly. He wore an insulin pump beneath his race suit and placed a glucose monitor on his steering wheel. His pit crew became part of his health team, monitoring his levels just like his lap times. Dramatic pause. He wasn't just racing others anymore. He was racing with diabetes. And every time he started his engine, he was proving something powerful, that no diagnosis can stop determination. Music builds cinematic and inspiring tone. In 2011, Charlie Kimball made history, becoming the first full-time IndyCar driver with type 1 diabetes. And just 2 years later, in 2013, he crossed the finish line first at the Mid-Ohio IndyCar race. Sound of cheering crowd, slow-motion visuals of victory celebration. It wasn't just a race win. It was a message to millions around the world living with diabetes. You're not limited by your condition. You are limited only by your mindset. Inspiring music swells. Gentle, uplifting piano returns. Charlie Kimball once said, "Diabetes didn't slow me down. It just gave me another reason to go faster." His story reminds us all that every challenge can be turned into strength, and every obstacle into opportunity. So if you're living with diabetes, remember, it's not the end of your race. It's just a new lap, and you're still in control of the wheel. Pause. Music grows brighter. Asterisk. Keep driving. Keep believing. Because like Charlie Kimball, you can still win your race. Music fades out with the sound of a car engine speeding into the distance. IndyCar, health inspiration, overcoming challenges, never give up, inspirational people, racing story.